I'm back. Got an extra bonus story for the weekend. This one is called Princess Maire, the Leprechaun, and the Giant. And like the Leprechaun and the Storyteller, these are from a book called Irish Leprechaun Stories by Barbara McCarthy. Now, King Conla was not a man of action. He was famous for his deep thoughts, but it was well known that in a crisis he couldn't move out of his own way. He spent hours each day sitting on the throne, wondering how to save his small kingdom from destruction. Long ago, when he was just a young king, he had sat and watched as the giants from Scotland flung huge rocks into the sea towards Ireland. They used those rocks as stepping stones to come over to invade Ireland. And when his people came to him for help, King Conla told them that he would think about the best way to handle the problem. While he was thinking, the days passed, and the giants took over his kingdom and forced the people to pay huge taxes, which they could not afford. The years went by, and the people in Conla's kingdom were poor and unhappy. The giants made their stronghold on an island across the water and in full view of King Conla's castle. And from there they imposed their laws on the kingdom. Each month, the chief giant paid a visit to King Conla's castle to watch over the people of the kingdom as they delivered fish and fowl and the best of their crops, which the giants required for payment. The chief giant was the ugliest of all the giants, with great sinewy arms the size of tree trunks. Surly was his name and his character. Like his father before him, he had one eye in the middle of his forehead, and worms crawled about in his thick, tangled hair. The people hated to look at them and kept their heads bowed, and their eyes on the ground as they made their deliveries. And when the courtyard was filled with the fruits of their labors, Surly gave an order to his men, and they loaded all the goods into boats down at the pier and rowed back to their island. Throughout the land, the people were in despair. They were not free to enjoy the beautiful countryside up in the north of Ireland, where soft rainfalls kept the grassy hills green and salmon jumped in the clear streams. They were a people who loved to dance and sing and tell wonderful stories, but the giants took even the very joy of living from them, and soon there was no more music to be heard in the land, no more dancing or storytelling. The people were sad. Now King Conla had a little daughter who was not afraid of the giants. Princess Maire was only 7 years old, and although she thought the giants were ugly creatures, she did not allow them to upset her. Since her father spent his days brooding in his throne room, her mother had to organize the castle workers and was kept busy with affairs of state. The little princess had to entertain herself and had no trouble finding amusement. She passed each day happily in the woods near her father's castle. Her nurse Bridget trundled along behind the little princess, but when they reached the circle of toadstools, Bridget was content to make herself comfortable on the mossy grass, leaning against the oak tree. For hours she busied herself with her embroidery, her needle flashing in and out through the pillow cover she was decorating. Princess Maire had instructions not to wander out of sight, but she was free to gather flowers and play with her friends, the fairy folk. Now the grassy hill behind the castle had been a fairy fort for thousands of years, and it is a well-known fact that fairies will sometimes allow themselves to be seen by children. The circle of toadstools was a favorite place to play for Maire and the fairies. The fairies were not afraid of being discovered, as the toadstools were secluded from the castle by tall oak and horse-chestnut trees. Besides, they were only visible to the princess, and when Bridget heard Maire talking to the fairies, she shook her head and thought, "What an imagination that little one has." Maire's mother and father were too busy to listen when she told them stories about the fairies who lived in the hill. Now one summer's day, when Maire and her little friends were making daisy chains, an old fairy, dressed in a suit of green, came and sat cross-legged on a toadstool and began to hammer nails into a tiny fairy shoe. He took no notice of the others, but Maure was curious, as she had never seen this old fellow. "Who is that?" she whispered to her little friends, nodding in the odd fellow's direction. "That's Larry the Leprechaun," one of the fairy girls replied. "He makes our shoes for us." "I've never seen him here," said Maure. "Well, leprechauns are solitary fairies," said a fairy boy. "They're very wise and prefer to work alone while they do some serious thinking." "My daddy is a serious thinker," said Maure. "He's trying to find a way to get rid of the giants, but he's not having any success." "Perhaps Larry could help your father," suggested a fairy boy. "Let's ask him." When the leprechaun saw them approaching, he quickly gathered up his work, and standing on the toadstool, he glared down at Maure and said, "I will not tell you where the gold is buried. You'll not take it from me." Now Maure was startled by his rudeness, but the fairies quickly explained to Larry that Maure did not want his gold, just a little assistance. And they told Larry about the giants who were ruling King Conla's kingdom. Larry frowned and sat down again on his toadstool. "You'll need more than a little assistance to get rid of the giants," he said. "But I can help you. Leprechauns know where all the wealth of the world is buried, but even if I gave you a pot of gold, it would not rid your kingdom of the giants. You must outsmart them, and leprechauns are very well trained in that." Now the leprechaun paused and thought for a moment, and then a smile spread over his face and wrinkles appeared around his eyes. "I have an idea," he told Maure, and he put his hand into his pocket and took out a silver shilling. "Give this to your father," said Larry, handing down the coin to Maure. "It is a magic coin. Tell him that it was a leprechaun who gave it to you. And tell him that if he doesn't believe you, the coin will disappear." "That, of course, is to be expected. So meet me here again tomorrow, and I'll give you another coin." As Maure put the coin into the front pocket of her dress, she heard Bridget calling her. She quickly thanked Larry and the fairies and skipped off to join her old nurse, who was stretching herself and preparing to return to the castle. At dinner time, when her father emerged from his throne room to join the family for dinner, Maure showed him the magic shilling and told him the story. The king held the coin in his fingers and examined it. And when Maure told him it was a leprechaun who had given it to her, King Conla gave a loud laugh, and instantly the coin vanished. "Now you did it," exclaimed the princess, and explained that the leprechaun had said that the coin would disappear if the king did not believe the story. "Tomorrow I'll bring you another coin, Daddy, but you must believe me when you see it. The leprechaun says that he can help you get rid of the giants." King Conla was silent all through dinner. He was wondering how much truth there could be in his young daughter's story. And if indeed it was true, how could a leprechaun help him? The next day dawned brightly, and after breakfast the princess set off for the woods with her old nurse. King Conla did not go to his throne room, but instead followed Maure and Bridget without being seen. And he watched from a distance as Bridget settled herself in the grass, and Maure went towards the circle of toadstools. He heard Maure's voice and saw her smile, but could not see anything else. Just as he was thinking that the story was all in his daughter's imagination, Maure walked towards one of the toadstools, reached up her hand, and suddenly King Conla saw she held a shiny coin in her fingers. At the same time, Maure turned and looked over to where he was hiding behind a tree. "It's all right, Daddy," she called. "You can come out now. Larry knows you are here." Sheepishly, King Conla walked towards Maure, and as he did, he saw several fairies gathered around a toadstool, and who should be sitting on the top but a little old man with a very wise look on his face. The king was trembling with fear and found that he was as terrified of these little people as he was of the giants. But the leprechaun put him at ease and told him that he had nothing to fear from them. The princess put their little hand in his and gave it a reassuring squeeze, and his fear vanished. "Your Majesty," said Larry the Leprechaun, I have a plan that will rid you of the giants. I'm prepared to offer them a challenge. Next month, when the chief giant Surly comes to your castle, I will appear and offer to show him where all the wealth of the world is hidden, if he can outsmart me. His greed will oblige him to accept the challenge, and if he loses the contest, he loses power over your kingdom. Never fear, your highness. I am a master of craftiness and will not be defeated. The leprechaun bowed low to the king. Now Connla was doubtful, but willing to give the leprechaun a chance, and he thanked him and returned to his castle to brood till the following month. Very early on the day of the giant's visit, the people of the kingdom began to troop into the castle grounds. Some came with carts laden with sacks of wheat and barley. Others came on foot with full sacks on their backs. King Connla nervously paced back and forth in the courtyard, waiting for the arrival of the chief giant and the leprechaun. As soon as Surly stepped out of his boat and approached the castle, Larry the leprechaun appeared by King Connla's side. Several people noticed him immediately and gasped out loud. There was no doubt in their minds that it was a leprechaun who stood before them. His smart green suit was well fitted, and on his head he wore a red cap bedecked with a peacock's feather. "Have no fear," said Larry to the king. "Place your trust in me, and I will take care of you." Surly did not notice the leprechaun when he first walked into the courtyard. Larry was too low to the ground for him to be clearly seen by the huge giant, but gradually Surly saw the pointed fingers and heard the gasps of the people who were astonished to see a leprechaun standing before them. Surly addressed the king and demanded to know what all the commotion was about. King Connla bent down and exchanged a few words with Larry, then stood up, holding the leprechaun on the palm of his hand. Surly was amazed. He had heard all about the Irish leprechauns, and instantly he thought of gold. The leprechaun greeted the giant cheerfully, and reluctantly the giant replied. He was suspicious as to why this leprechaun had suddenly made an appearance, but Larry did not keep him long in suspense. "I am here to propose a contest between yourself and myself," he told Surly. "If you win, then I will show you where all the wealth of the world is hidden. But if I win, then I ask that you leave King Connla's kingdom and never return." Surly the giant did not hesitate before answering. "I agree. Let us have the contest immediately," said he, thinking that such a tiny fellow could not possibly defeat a great giant. "I propose a game of hide and seek," said the leprechaun. "It will be a magical game, as I know that you have those powers as well as myself. I will give you the advantage," said the leprechaun. "I'll let you hide first. For 3 days you must hide, and I must find you before the end of each day, or I will lose the contest. If I do find you, then I must hide for 3 days, and you must find me. Are you ready to begin?" "I am," said the giant, already planning where he was going to hide. "Let the contest begin," said King Connla, and instantly Surly the giant vanished. A little fairy appeared on the leprechaun's shoulder and whispered, "The giant is up at the top of the horse chestnut tree." So Larry immediately went to the orchard, followed by a crowd of people, and found the giant in the tree. Everyone cheered, and Surly was very annoyed. "Ah," he shouted, "you found me today, but you won't find me tomorrow." Well, King Connla allowed his people to sleep in the courtyard overnight, as nobody wished to leave all the excitement. And for the first time in years, a feeling of hope was spreading amongst the people. The king provided food for his subjects that night, and the following morning the giant and the leprechauns faced each other again, and as soon as the contest began, Surly again disappeared. Once more a little fairy came and whispered to Larry, "There's a bucket of water out back. Pour out the water and see what you will find." So Larry quickly found the bucket and turned it upside down, and out flew the giant in a great rage. The people laughed and cheered, and that night they lit a bonfire in the courtyard of the castle and sang songs of the good old days. The next day, Surly was waiting in the courtyard when the leprechaun arrived. "You found me on the other 2 days, but you'll not find me today," he said dourly. Now, a fairy perched on Princess Maure's shoulder and whispered in her ear, "Take off your ring and give it to Larry. Tell him to go inside and throw it into the fire." Maure did as she was told, and when Larry threw her ring into the fire, the giant jumped out. "Ah, I'm burned, I'm burned," he shouted, hopping around the room. Other people held their sides and laughed out loud. The first part of the contest had been won by the leprechaun, but the giant was determined that the victory would be his. So he sent his men to hide throughout the castle and all around the castle grounds to find the leprechaun's hiding place. Well, Surly's men were all giants like himself and were easily visible to the fairy folk who were helping the leprechaun and warned him of the hiding places of the giants. When it was Larry's turn to hide, he went secretly to the royal stables and had a talk with Princess Maure's white pony. "Will you help me to hide?" asked Larry. "I will indeed," replied the pony. "Take a hair out of my mane and climb up into that space." So Larry did as he was told, and the giant searched all day long but couldn't find him. At the end of the day, Larry came out but didn't tell where he had been hiding. The giant was furious, and he beat his men, who had been no help to him at all. Now a great feeling of excitement was spreading through King Conla's kingdom. The men who had camped out at the castle sent for their families, and they brought musical instruments, and stories were told around the bonfire that night, stories of hope for a better life. The next morning the crowd gathered quietly in the castle yard. They gasped when Larry arrived wearing a waistcoat of green velvet with buttons made of real gold. He tucked his thumbs into the small pockets of his waistcoat and rocked back and forth with a smile on his face as they waited for Surly to arrive in his boat from the island. When the boat pulled into the pier, Surly disembarked looking grumpier than ever, and he pushed his men out of the way and walked up to the castle. Scarcely a word was passed between the contestants when King Conla gave the word to begin. Larry immediately returned to the castle stables. This time he asked for the pony's advice. "Where do you think I should hide?" he said. "Take a nail out of my shoe," said the pony, "and hide in that space." So Larry did as he was told, and the giant searched the whole day through, but couldn't find him. At the day's end, when people came out of hiding, the people cheered, and the giant bustled his men into the boat and beat a hasty retreat to the island. That night, King Conla invited Larry the leprechaun to have dinner at the castle, and while they ate their meal in the great hall, the people danced around their bonfire in the courtyard. Princess Maure was a happy little girl, glad to see the difference in her father. He was no longer a man of inaction. The leprechaun explained that the giants had the power to put a spell of inactivity on humans, so that they would meet with no resistance, and he felt sure that that was what had happened to King Conla. The next morning, the entire kingdom gathered to see the final day of the contest. Those who could not fit inside the castle walls stood outside on the grassy hills and waited for news of the result. When the contest began, Larry went once again to the castle stable, and this time he asked the pony if he could hide in his mouth. "Of course," said the pony. "Just take out one of my teeth. It will not bother me, and climb into that space." Now, all day long, the giant roared around the castle trying to find the leprechaun. His rage was so terrible, the people ran away when he came close to them. He searched every nook and cranny in the castle itself, and all around the stables and outhouses, but he never found the leprechaun. At the end of the day, when Larry came out of hiding, the cheers and the shouts of joy were deafening. With tears of joy, husbands hugged their wives and children, and Larry was placed in a small chair and carried aloft around the courtyard. Surely the giant hung his head in shame. King Conla stood tall with his wife beside him, and Princess Maire in his arms, and he told Surly the giants were welcome to continue living on the island, but not welcome anywhere else in Ireland. Surly and his men trooped quietly onto their boat, and amidst loud cheers from all the people on their shore, they left King Conla's kingdom for the last time. Victory celebrations lasted for 7 days and 7 nights throughout the kingdom, and afterwards the people returned to their everyday work. But they brought a happiness with them which they had not felt for years, and now, at the end of the day's work, they gathered together to dance and sing and share their joy of living. King Conla ruled his kingdom wisely and well, and Larry the Leprechaun returned to the land of the fairies. Thereafter he was seen only by the lovely Princess Maire, who continued to visit her fairy friends. The rocks which the giants had thrown into the sea from Scotland to use as stepping stones to Ireland were allowed to remain where they were, and ever after they became known as the Giant's Causeway. And so we say goodbye to Princess Maire, her father King Conla, and Larry the Leprechaun. Take care. Stay well.